The gang lands in Summers and is welcomed by the lax and slower-paced music and sounds of the crashing waves. After all that's happened in perhaps the last 15 minutes of the game, this is a welcome change of pace. It lets the player just sit back and relax. The direct contrast to the previous area they were in, Winters, provides a clear signal to the player that they're in a new section of the game, and it's time for a bit of a reset. The pieces of the Skyrunner are left behind in the sand and have already begun to sink and disappear into the ground, a subtle way of signaling that this is its final appearance. This is roughly the halfway point in the game, and seeing the waves bury it feels like the game saying, this is a symbol of the first half of the game. That's over now, and we can move on. This contrast further makes sense since the two are sister cities. Summers Beach itself is pretty open. There are several unattended chairs and umbrellas. Gives the whole thing a sort of resort feel, like the player is also on vacation, again highlighting the contrast and energy between now and not too long ago. They're also blue, however, which the game established as a connection with evil earlier in the adventure. Not trying to overanalyze, but to be short, it's a paradise with these little specks, like spots of impurity. The color composition is clear. Starting from the far west end, let's work our way right and talk to people as we see them, starting with this sunburned lady. She scolds the party for interrupting her beach nap, and it becomes quickly apparent that the people around here are pretty blunt. I also like how she's laying with her head outwards from the umbrella. Not sure if it was meant to look awkward and odd like this, but it feels like a bit of a joke, like she's a bit of a ditz. This woman in the sunglasses and hat says the party looks so serious for being in a paradise like Summers. She urges them to relax, and this highlights a couple of things. One, that the party's faces aren't merely sprites, they are somewhat accurate representations of how they're emoting in the world. And this makes sense, with the prevalent themes of global responsibility and their maturity being hastened likely weigh heavily on them. Despite the many silly situations our heroes find themselves in, it's only funny as an outsider, as the player. To them it's distressing, as all good comedies follow this understanding.
Now your job is to take each piece of candy and wrap it in one of these papers.
Oh, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle this okay.
It's a matter of perspective, and this NPC's perspective helps communicate the reality of the game universe more clearly to the player. Secondly, it displays a contentment with major problems in the world on her part. On perspective, she displays one not concerned with the many troubles the outside world has been facing on account of her placement within it, in a paradise like Summers. This worldview, however, is shown not to hold up, as nonetheless evil creeps its way in, even here. Suddenly that color thing makes more sense now, huh? The man next to her, notably in blue trunks, says something similar and shows outward disdain for them, saying they're spoiling the atmosphere. He's wearing blue, he's a bit more antagonistic. It all connects, no need to dive too much into it. It's creeping into him. Those shorts! Near the shore is this couple. Or not. The woman says the guy keeps following her. He's shown to be lusting after her, which is an archetypal type of evil, one of the 7 deadly sins even. And look what color he has on. This lady from earlier was mean, but was wearing red though. What gives? Look what she's directly under. Even the blue ocean is slowly invading the land, pushing and pulling. They're at direct odds with each other. It's like yin and yang, I love it. Without a doubt though, the most interesting NPC is this one, who shares the exact same sprite with the bikini zombie from all the way back in Threed. It's not made clear, however, if this is the same character. She asks the party not to talk to her and says that her mind is completely blank. Of all of the NPCs on the beach, with the exception of this salesman who is clearly a slop brother, she is the only one to not be dressed in red or blue. I'm disregarding the slop brother due to him being an NPC inherently disconnected from the location. He's clearly a traveling vendor, while her attire is clearly connected to the setting. Just wanted to establish that. The Bikini Zombie, which is apparently her official name by the way, though I'm just using it for convenience, was an affiliate of the zombies in Threed, and was clearly under control, a sort of succubus-esque lure for the protagonist. Upon defeating Belch, the people were freed, though it wasn't made overly apparent what this looked like to those actually under his control. And with this character's emphasis on not wanting interaction due to her mind being scattered and not simply rudeness, I personally interpret them to be one and the same. Especially since this is the only other time in the game this sprite is used. She went somewhere to reconcile herself and disconnect. Going to a foreign place in order to do so itself is a trope, and I don't find this to be much of a stretch at all. Makes sense she wouldn't want to talk to them. I think even having the slop row here somewhat lends to this. Two characters right by each other who directly resemble ones from earlier in the game. One shies away and disassociates, and the other is friendly and open. Speaking of him though, he also sells Gelato de Resort, which helps to communicate the type of location it's meant to be a satire of, and that is many European countries. It has traces of Italy and Spain, though it seems to most directly be parodying France, especially with its focus on the beach, not to mention the bluntness which many Americans associate with the French. The utilizing of stereotypes, though possibly corny, helps most clearly communicate what the game is going for, and is just vague enough to where it doesn't really come across as too pointed. Continuing on, there's this guy. He brags about his suntan, pride, and guess what? Blue blue, I'm learning how to whistle. And that brings us to the East End. The beach also has two kinds of enemies. A clone of Officer Strong, continuing a motif of police corruption in cities, and the tough guy who is clearly poking fun at beach bros, and can even, when defeated, drop a chick. They literally pick up chicks. Now let's head back left and do this tour one more time for Main Street. The buildings all clearly have a much more elegant resort look to them, communicating the fanciness of the location. Their colors also stick mainly to pastels, which helps to sell the feeling of heat, like a sunset beating down on them. The sidewalks themselves are tiled, common of beach towns, as well as palm trees, which no BG setting is complete without. There are taxis, though they don't move here like in Onett. I think it helps to reinforce the laid-backness of summers, not to mention all the commemorative photo taking, lots of it. The first stop is the L'Hôtel du Sommers, clearly leaning into the French aesthetic. The employees are adorned with obnoxiously posh names, and a stay itself is $450 a night right now, with a full party, and becomes more expensive later. Notice how this is also the only one to not even have a free phone to use. This is the most expensive a hotel gets in the entire game. So what does a stay in the famed L'Hôtel du Sommers get someone? Well, to be fair, a quite nice room with a balcony and everything. This guy in the hallway says everyone's only nice to get money out of them, which could act as a more explicit way of showing the player what they should be observing, as, well, it's not out of the question a child playing this when it came out may never have traveled abroad before, and may not be aware of some of the cultural things like this. The guy in the room over has a humorous line about pronunciations, which is quite funny as it's one that can only be achieved through text, utilizing the form to its full potential. But this also further shows that they're clearly in another country, doling out info the player should know while delivering some tightly written comedy. Two birds, one stone. Heading down, this place is big, much bigger than the hotels before it, but like the people of Summers themselves, in reality it's pretty shallow, not actually offering all that much more than the glitz and glamour it presents. This lady points the player to the Scaraba Cultural Museum down the street as a place of interest, specifically the guard. Direct, although not the most cleverly written line. This lady is much more brief. The bellboy clues the player in that Pokey has been through recently, meaning he was here while they were briefly stopped in Winters. It's small, but a nice bit of tension to add in the pursuit. Keeps you on your toes. The man outside the hotel bemoans the high prices of things, as he should. Summer's prices are very high, and intentionally so, to better emulate the types of places it's satirizing, in an all too real sense, as many of the items can be bought at a much cheaper price not too far down the road. Some literally. Next up is the restaurant. Here the player can indulge in more overpriced things if they're so inclined. It's no wonder this place has so few customers. There are a lot of rude people in here, no way of sugarcoating it. They mistreat you, insult your tastes, literally, and burp on you. There's some funny dialogue, but the location is mostly just for additional world building, which is always welcome in an RPG, as strange as it may be, self-admittedly. Also acts as a photo opt. Nice view though, as inconsistent as it is with the outside. This guy's vacation plans are not going to, well, plan, and blue really suits this guy. As much as France is written all over this place, this screams Italy. This truck is here for some reason. I guess it's just additional set dressing, though I suppose it could be implied it's providing a restock for the nearby store. There's also an abandoned vendor stand, which we'll come back to later. I like the detail of the bike parked outside the store. Feels very summery. Inside, this person mentions a big monster between here and Scaraba. I like that they mention they've seen a picture of it, as I think this adds some nice ambiguity. Like, on one hand, it lends to a player's understanding that there really is something there, but also feels somewhat like a callback to the Tessie Watching Club in Winters, which feels intentional, as the game has declared them sister cities, so they have these sort of rhymes.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
This woman says it like it is. There's a nice visual cohesion in here by incorporating beachy colors, which gives the store a look more like a souvenir shop, which is totally appropriate. Down the road is Club Stoic. Or not. Either way, can't do anything here yet. The nearby bird talks about a kraken being the monster on the way to Scaraba, attacking ships as they cross through. Are you scared? It's actually not limited to this either. It cycles through multiple nearby NPCs' dialogue. The bird being a Mina also is noteworthy, as they're often associated with bad luck. Go figure. In the streets, there are more signs and taxis to fight. Same as Forside, their placement here makes sense. Just wanted to mention them. This guy outside the museum is in an I Heart NY shirt, clearly communicating he's a tourist, which is a nice touch. He mentions the museum has a hieroglyph from a pyramid in it. Heading into the museum at $3 a person, this one has more to see than Forside's. The exhibits featured are caskets of several pharaohs, seemingly. There's a cute joke about the boxes becoming less and less serious, appropriately laid out in a manner that builds towards it from right to left. This dork mumbles about Mr. Spoon from Forside, establishing a connection between the two, highlighted by a sound effect, communicating to the player the information is important. And this towhead also mentions they just missed Pokey again. Upstairs is the guard mentioned at the hotel, who tells the protagonist the room is being remodeled and can't let them through, unless a deal involving some jewelry can be made. Objective clear, and it's at the largest building in the entire city, so it's not too hard to keep in the back of one's mind, right? Back outside, this person enjoys themselves, and I just think that's nice. And the hitman can also be found here. To the right is the hospital. This sign on the second floor is one I find quite funny, sort of playing on some of the stereotypes about holistic medicine that are often joked about as being, like, European. Other than that though, not much of note here, as this is among, if not the smallest hotel seen so far, for such a high-end location. Not sure if this is a comment on something, but I couldn't draw anything from it. And with that, the party arrives in Toto, the harbor town east of Summer's main resort. The protagonist also finds they, again, just missed Pokey. Toto is a less affluent part of Summers, with a clear divide in even the way the water looks, less picturesque. It's deeper and is where all the ships are anchored. The cultural divide is also stark. People are more eccentric around these parts. The buildings are smaller, and it has a bit more grit to it. So let's just take it one building at a time. This guy mentions Scaraba and how it's his dream town. Okay. Grass is always greener, I suppose. This is the sailor whose dialogue corresponds to the Mina bird from earlier, which will be a fun little payoff no matter which dialogue the player got from that bird so long as they talk to everyone. This cat is a little scrappy, ready for a fight. Yes, I got all that from Fist. The shop sells mostly low-cost stuff, sandwiches and the such. Stuff that makes sense would be sold at a harbor, for sailors. Feels true to the setting. Even the coin of defense, which is sort of like a luck charm, not unheard of for a sailor to adorn themselves with. Next door, this guy is a grave robber too afraid to rob a grave, albeit a pyramid. Adds to the mystery surrounding Scaraba, so it has some story functionality. Next up is this dude who looks much different from the rest of the town, nudge nudge wink wink. Talking to him, he'll give the protagonist the phone number to get access to the Stoic Club. Well, it's a point of interest as the player can sort of intuitively tell they're supposed to go there, as they're told they can't enter, but this solution seems a bit odd at first. Just sort of wander around and talk to this specific random guy? Exactly. In a section the game has sanctioned as very laid back, it makes sense the mode of progression would shift as well to something similar. Just sort of bumbling around here until the player lands at his house allows them to take in the atmosphere and keeps things more casual for this section. Now, I don't think this is how the game should always function with its progress, and luckily it doesn't overstay its welcome. There have been portions of it like this before, but this is definitely the most open it's been with it so far, in terms of scope of the location to explore. All the major cities so far have been somewhat large, but there have always been clear points to observe, or at the very least, ones that the game thinks are clear. Here, the importance of the Stoic Club isn't really readily apparent, and its significance isn't even found unless the player goes even further past this point. So, things are quite loose in this small section, and I welcome it after all the boom 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 of the last few sequences. It's a nice change of pace. So, continuing on, leaving the house after receiving the phone number will trigger a cutscene to play. Tony from the Blonde Boys School calls, saying he's collecting players' names for a school project. He expresses an outright awareness of the player, breaking the fourth wall. It's a pretty surreal moment, and a naming scream comes up, along with the naming music from the opening of the game kicking in. This signals that this is of the same significance to the player, urging them to put their actual name in. He thanks the player, confirms with them, and says his goodbyes, with particular focus on his former roommate. While the addressing of the player may be immersion breaking at first, the game has to some extent established the player's presence with the party to some extent. How so? Well, it's yet another thing we'll just have to see about at a later time. So, as mentioned before, Tony's goodbye also has an intent focus on the young inventor. Now, there have been seeds planted throughout about the relationship between these two characters, and this is very much tied to that, but I'll be saving exploring that for later. Just want to make it clear it's not being ignored. This nearby sailor offers rides to Scaraba on his ship, but won't at the moment due to his concern for his wife, who's become entangled with a strange club which is causing her to neglect her magic cake business, and likewise their marriage to fall apart. This man is the only indication to the player of the club's importance, unless they visited the Hint Man, and he looks like several other NPCs as well. Nothing denotes his significance, which, as I mentioned before, I love. The slower pacing here is intentional, and though Summers is larger than some of the other areas, it's still basically completely horizontal, making it easy to efficiently talk to everyone and know who has already been talked to. The road leads to him eventually. Also, meow. This shut-in echoes worries about the Kraken and is the talk of the town in Toto. I also like that name, Toto. With the party literally crashing into Summers and also stepping into this area of very apparent different social status, it feels like an allusion to The Wizard of Oz and its famous line.
Toto? I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Speaking of dogs, this one just straight up speaks. No telepathy, like with other animals, he's talking. And if the situation couldn't get any weirder, the saxophonist also has a great line. This guy is seemingly shouting nonsense in the street, though it does call back to some of the strange things said about dinosaurs back in Forside.
It's crazy, but stranger things have happened.
No, they haven't. No, they haven't.
All right, guys.
Really though, the absurdity of this dialogue in a sea of bizarre dialogue does stand out due to these connections, and its lack of any sort of punchline. Perhaps he's onto something. Also, canon, EarthBound cat, confirmed homeowner. And that finally concludes our tour of Summers and Toto. With that, the player has nothing left to do but call for access to the Stoic Club. There's conveniently the phone right in the shop near the guy's house where the player got the number, so it's not a hassle to call them. There's even an ATM if the player has no cash. Consider it. The call is very brisk and the player now has access. On the way though, I want to mention the horizontal nature of the city is nice, easy to teleport in, and offers a nice wide area to execute it for less experienced players, in case they need to leave for whatever reason. Entering the Stoic Club, the player is ushered in by very downbeat, calm music. The colors are very dull and muted as well, and there's a large stone on the stage. What is this place? Though there are some entertaining lines, everyone here uses big words to sound smart, though they clearly carry zero substance. The server even takes advantage of their pompousness for the large amounts of money they spend here. On water. There are a few elements to analyze here, so let's take them one by one. First, the club itself. Seeing as it's a place for people to philosophize, the Stoic part of the name most likely comes from Stoicism, a school of philosophy that flourished in ancient Greece and Rome. The followers of it were even called the Stoics, so let's just drop all pretenses of this not being the root of things there. The Stoics formed their account of the world on the principles of logic, monistic physics, and naturalistic ethics. Together, these ideals form virtue. For many, this added up to an attitude of, don't worry about what you can't control, if you can control it, then fix it. As apathetic as it sounds though, it's not so much no emotion as it's an aspiration to anchor it in logic as much as possible. At a first look, it seems like the game is making fun of Stoics with their wordiness yielding little to no meaning, and them all soaking up every drip of their own arrogance all day, but I think it's a bit more nuanced. Not an attack on the Stoics themselves, but as a schema for philosophizers in a more general sense. None of the NPCs really express anything relating to Stoicism, it's all about hearing their own voices. They've adopted the title of Stoics in hopes of also adopting their perceptions as great thinkers as well, when in reality, they only have the name. They're clueless intellectuals parading as deep thinkers, no different from Carpainter or Monotoli. They're all just frauds. This is furthered by the central stone, which is clearly a play on the fantastical Philosopher's Stone, a total myth. The stone was said to have magical properties that could turn metals into gold and silver, or even be used to brew a potion for immortality. This rock has no such properties and can't even be interacted with. It's a symbol of total mysticism at the center of their club, supposedly rooted in the most classically logical school of thought. It's a total paradox, an oxymoron. The predominantly blue coloration lends to all this, demonstrating evil in such arrogance, shown in just how miserable everyone here seems to be. This guy mentions wanting magic cake from the lady near the door, then goes back onto yapping. This woman happens to be the sailor's wife. Talking to her, she snaps out of her word vomit to hear the protagonist would like to try her magic cake, and she says to meet her by her cart near the beach. He says she was removed from the members list, perhaps for taking too much time listening to what someone else was saying for a change. Meeting her at the cart, she gladly offers the main character a piece of cake for free, one she used her extra materials for, making it a very special magic cake. He immediately has a hallucination. Our hero has a very strange dream, and with that, the player is brought to Dalam in the Far East, specifically to the palace of the third boy and the fourth main character, the prince. The music during the transition has sort of a marching aesthetic to it, with Eastern instrumentation, escorting the player into this other part of the world. It then transitions to something much more contemplative. The palace is gold, which obviously is to demonstrate the affluence and influence of the boy's position, and is likely an allusion to Kinkakuji in Japan, a Buddhist temple also with a gold aesthetic. This would align with the many Buddhist themes and references made in Dalam, which we'll dive into in a little while. The young prince is informed by his master that the time has come for him to undergo his final test at the place of emptiness. From here, the player takes control of the prince. The music kicks in now to get the player pumped for the upcoming intense trial. His master, to his right, notably resembles Mr. Miyagi from the Karate Kid films, and the connection with the prince's martial arts style clothing is likely not a coincidence. He also generally resembles many classical masters in martial arts fiction, but given the film's recency at the time, I'm placing my bets there. There are some items. The foods having a focus on wellness, contrasting the many commonplace unhealthy food found elsewhere, as well as a brainstone, an item that helps him concentrate, preventing his PSI moves from being blocked, which reiterates his focus on training. Looking in his inventory, he also has the tiny ruby, noted as an old treasure of the country. He also has a bottle of water, which I'll discuss more later. Talking to the prince's phone reveals the main protagonist has been projected into him and is exerting some amount of influence over him and his demeanor. This also plays into the prince's characterization, which, yet again, is something I'll come back to shortly. The phone man here is likely a sort of double satire. One, submitting to royalty to the point of being a literal object, a show of great respect, and two, as a play on training regimes that involve attempting to ignore great amounts of distractions. There's more I'd like to go into about the prince's characterization now though. I like that the first time he's seen is when he's sitting on his throne, and the first thing the player does as him is leave it, as his humbling and submission to others is something that becomes a major part of what defines him, and there's more to come. The gi he wears is another show of this, as a student, always learning despite his status in his country, even though he has the respect of all of his peers already. A really cool way the game does this is through his stats. When opening them, the player can see he's already level 15 as opposed to the rest of the party who all started their journeys at level 1. It's a way of demonstrating how seriously he takes his training through gameplay, while also elevating the game design by not bringing in a new character to play as this late in the game at such a low starting point. Outside the palace are two very large elephant statues, which to a foreigner wouldn't look out of place in the East. Their placement here is very intentional though, as the animals represent divinity and royalty in many Eastern cultures, of which both apply to the prince. He's pursuing enlightenment and of royal heritage. There are also many ambiguous shapes outside, as well as by his throne, which I personally see as a symbol of the malleability of one's mind. Outside, it can be seen Dalam as a place high in the mountains, which also plays to the archetypes of martial arts training, as a place of solitude to focus on one's training. The surrounding clouds also elevate this, resembling ones in much traditional Asian art. This guy, who I assume is a monk of some sort, ponders what immortality truly is. I've heard this is a reference to a specific book on philosophy, but Frankly, I don't know it and couldn't find the source. However, this doesn't change that this sort of dialogue fits in with the setting that's been established, and contrasts the faux philosophers of Summers that the player just saw. This guy farts, which I think is meant to be a joke about making the player think he's initially humming in some sort of prayer. Many of the girls here fawn over him, sad he's so focused. Throughout the game, despite them coming from very different places, all 4 of the characters named at the beginning of the game share something in common: the motif of being forced to grow up. From having great responsibility thrust on them to a more traditional call to adventure. It's there, and seeing how it's affected each of them is interesting as well. For the prince, he's become very grown up, with a permanently furrowed brow, expressing his concentration. It's worth noting as it greatly contrasts with the others, who all have much blanker, indifferent expressions, though, as we discussed before, isn't quite the case. What's interesting is how the culture of the prince adores this. Though the girls are disappointed, even they can't help but respect his dedication, and it's especially seen from the adults, some of whom even offer him gifts. The player does have the option to play with this young girl though, taking a second to play patty cake, a moment where the player can allow him to be more childish for a fleeting moment. The shop in Dalam specializes in delicacies, all of which are quite good items, many especially for the prince, who has exclusive PP restoring effects from bottles of water, which is explained by this NPC. It's here though that I'd like to make special mention that the prince has no money despite his status. It's subtle, but another show of how submission is central to his characterization, humbling himself to go out without any monetary means, instead inherently relying on his own abilities and intuition. To the southwest are several rabbit statues blocking the way into another area. We'll be back. The whole layout of Dalam funnels the player to these 2 locations, very deliberate as both are important story locations, though I'm getting slightly ahead of myself. To the right, the player is led to their training grounds. The sign says to properly train, one must clear their mind, and this is how they'll truly understand Mu. The nearby old man comments that the prince has nice eyes. Some might take this to mean he's sort of pretty, but I think it's not so surface level. I think they're nice as in they communicate kindness, which I think helps add to some more detail to this largely silent character. He tells that he once completed Mu training himself, and that he has things to teach him, though he's still learning himself, and that they'll meet again. He vanishes. A nice show of the contrast between a young man graduating and an older man still learning. Or you can just walk around him. He also teleports away in a tornado, which in Japanese mythology have been linked with the yokai, or manifestations of spirits. More on this another time. Up the rope he goes, a short test of physical strength, now leading into one of the mind. Before this next part though, what is Mu? One might assume it's made up for the game, seeing as it even has what may seem like a silly name. But it actually has spiritual roots, in Buddhism no less, which is all too relevant given the many allusions made to it so far. Mu comes from a famous teaching by Zen master Zhao Zhou in the Kon case, Does a Dog Have Buddha Nature? Mu is beyond concept, which may seem like a very unhelpful explanation, so let's look a bit deeper. It also seems like an anti-concept, all about directing insight into reality. The answer to the question without an answer. Mu is the answer when there isn't one, or forces an incorrect answer. It's difficult to explain, and seeking out a definitive answer from methods outside studying and meditating on it may even be seen as cheating the process. It's a bit of an ocean. I personally, however, see it as the desire and pursuit of truth that even can transcend full understanding, and outside the binaries of choice. It's a journey many are on even by different names, so let's now see what we can learn and abstract from it about our own understandings in training. The prince sits down and begins his meditation. The music pauses, almost like moans of prayer. Someone comes informing the prince his master wants him. The prince enters a place beyond reality, perhaps a form of transcendental meditation, and an apparition appears. A battle initiates. Or is it? His ancestor informs him that he must break his legs. And his arms. He dies. But he doesn't. Continuing will prevent him from progressing, but it's also the only way for him to achieve what he wants. leaving behind any and all simple reasoning. Next are his ears. After giving everything he has, he completes the training. By losing everything, he gains everything. Why? That's how it is. And that's as close to a rational explanation for Mu as I think there may be. Wait, was this a test? This is another major show of the prince's defining trait of submission and humbling himself in order to grow. And it's not over yet. I also appreciate that part of this sequence is a bit of a puzzle, requiring the player to, like the prince, also resist temptations along the way. It makes them a part of the experience rather than just the person there to witness it. He returns to his master, who congratulates him. The music changes to the same theme that played when the main character said goodbye to Buzz Buzz, and now while saying farewell to the prince's master, as he tells him of his destiny in the same way. With his training completed, he levels up. And again, and again. He learns Teleport Beta, showing just how much more experienced he is with PSI than the others, as well as that expansion of one's mind is linked directly with the expansion of their PSI abilities. He then leaves Dalam. He arrives in Summers, where he meets the rest of the party. He expresses his deep respect for the hero by declaring his submission to him, understanding he himself still also has much more learning to do. This is the conclusion to his previous, more apprehensive pseudo-submission to him earlier, while he was expressing some sort of control over him back in Dalam. Finally united, the Chosen Four set out together. The Magic Cake Lady says she no longer sells it, but she does now sell magic tarts, one of the few places PP restoring items can be bought. Good place for them, as due to her importance to the plot, it's not unlikely the player would talk to her again after. And with all that, what was that stuff with the magic cake about? Well, seeing as they're here when he eats it, has a transcendental experience, and is found hereafter, it seems like it was straight up drugged. I think this plays into a couple of different angles though. Firstly, the idea of doing psychedelics in Europe isn't unheard of among foreigners. And second, seeing as the protagonist's psychic abilities are more limited than both his magic-wielding friends at this point, which gets elaborated on later, I can see it being necessary for him to need the extra boost to be able to make contact from so far away. In regards to the story beat's placement, it's rather odd and disjointed in the greater narrative. The game makes the prince necessary to the plot here, as we're about to see, but it's a bit arbitrary to be placed specifically here, especially when directly compared to when the young inventor was cried out for, also being called by telepathic means. It felt much more natural here, as the party was trapped by antagonist and cornered, necessitating it. Meanwhile, they were stuck here more by circumstance. They need to get to Scaraba, but aren't allowed to, even when the lady returns to her magic cake stand before partaking, and will also need something from the museum that is needlessly walled off by an NPC that requires the prince to solve. But because the game says so, not because the story naturally warrants it. I can't lie, it's choppy. After all that though, Bikini Zombie is starting to become more open, expressing her affection for the prince. I like this for two reasons. It continues the trend of girls fawning over him, and it makes sense she'd interact with him and not the others, as she's already had encounters with the first two in Threed, and was also affected by the inventor's actions there as well, adding up to her not caring for them as seen before. The fawning can also be seen by this female NPC, so it's definitely intentional. While in the store, let's go over this. The player may be inclined to stack the prince with armor and weapons, but we'll see most of don't work on him. He's a special case, so we'll discuss this more as it comes up. The gang takes a vacation photo with their new friend and head back to the sailor in Toto. With his wife back, he offers to take them to Scaraba now at 20 bucks a person, and with that, board the boat and take off. The music takes on an appropriately nautical tone. The boat passes many islands on the journey, filling out the world a bit more, which is welcome. The captain gets seasick on the trip, which is clearly meant as a comedic contrast to his profession as a sailor, but I'm just explaining jokes at this point. He brings up the prince's home country and subtly suggests returning there, some indication there's something for the entire group. And there's even situational dialogue if the player already has a certain key item by this point, which I'll clarify when we get around to it. I want to make it clear though that the sailor here is talking to the prince. The ship pushes on when suddenly the Kraken attacks. It's very sudden, and in conjunction with the darkness coming on very quickly can be quite surprising. The boss starts and the music has an electronic tone to it, which is all too appropriate, seeing as the Kraken is clearly based on an eel to some extent. Meanwhile, the background flows like the water surrounding them. Combined with the darkness, it invokes the imagery of a lot of classic encounters with large beasts of the sea. Overall though, this Kraken does not really resemble one at all. It's closer to a leviathan, or again, an eel. Krakens are supposedly huge squids, so what gives? I don't know. The thing sort of defies all preconceived notions of the creatures. As it's a water-based creature, one would probably expect it to use water-based attacks, but no, it uses pretty much every other element. It also notably has blood all over its mouth, making it appear extra threatening. This fight though can be a bit unpredictable, as it feels like it's sort of setting up the prince to be steamrolled with one bad hit. It should be noted that at this point, the game opens up much more. With all party members united, the player can pursue a number of different story progressing objectives, but I'm attempting to follow what I believe the game is leading the player to do. So, while the prince could be stronger by this point by doing one of those things first, the game directs the player in this direction. Scaraba has been a large point of conversation, so the player would naturally assume that's the next place to go. With the Kraken defeated, the ship presses on and arrives in Scaraba, a play on Saudi Arabia and some other North African countries as well. Let's look around town. The music has a clear Arabian influence. It reminds me a lot of when Indiana Jones goes to Egypt, and it doesn't feel remotely like a stretch to say the film's portrayal of it could have been an influence, seeing as how heavily Lucas and Spielberg have influenced several moments already in the story. The heat is intense here, seen by how tight the barriers around the town are where the player can and can't get sunstroke. This guy lets the player know that they again just missed Pokey, thankfully leaving out some details, though the player can observe them themselves if they so desire. This guy at the end of his rope, literally, mentions someone who used to be a dungeon maker having become a dungeon man, whatever that means. It's just vague enough to intrigue the player without spelling out what it's being referred to. He offers the key to him, again, whatever that means, but unfortunately has lost it. Better keep an eye out. The hospital is the only white building in town, which is a nice subtle way to distinguish it. Well, besides this one, which can't be answered. Maybe it's additional hospital supplies. In the hotel, the arms dealer could be found right next to where the party sleeps. Not exactly clear what the commentary might be there, but not going to lie, seems a bit dangerous to speculate on, so let's just keep moving. This man mentions a tribe called the Tenda who used to live in Scaraba but moved to deep darkness. He's unsure if they're still alive. Lots of foreshadowing here, refreshing after how most of the dialogue in Summers was for flavor. The pacing's picking back up now. Also nice and expedited, as the town of Scaraba is much smaller, so it's not like the player has to now explore another huge area. Hassan's shop has a lot of personality, and is notable for being one of the few NPCs to be clearly named. Outside the shop is a marketplace though, laid out in a much more traditional way, more closely emulating the setting it's parodying. It's some nice attention to detail. There's a snake merchant playing on the snake charmer stereotype. He even speaks like one, which is funny. A fortune teller, someone who sells various seasonings and condiments, jewelry and other specialty clothing, more snakes, and Scarabian delicacies. The focus on food, animals, and jewels feels very true to what might be in a setting like this. And while yes, it plays on stereotypes, it's not done in some demeaning, condescending way, but in the way Epcot depicts various cultures, by using the most well-known elements to convey the sense of feeling like one's really there, much like how Hitchcock would portray multiple countries in his thriller adventure films. Want to quickly note before moving on though that I bought a piggy nose. With a soulful farewell from this man, the party heads out towards the pyramid, a clear place to be drawn to, again by playing into the player's cultural understandings of their scale and grandeur that it's probably important. In the desert there are several enemies, all of which are upgraded ones from the previous desert setting. Some left to be desired, but it's easily understandable, and there's about to be an area with many new enemies unique to it, so it hardly feels like a cop-out. The pyramids are not far, and the player can see there's plenty to interact with. Right? Right? Guess not. The doors are... Oh, back to Summers. Yeah, back at the museum, the player needs to interact with the guard, so I wanted to highlight this because this seems very easy to miss. He wants the prince's ruby from Dalam, but this for one is kept vaguer earlier, just referring to jewels.
They're jewels, Betty. They're jewels.
And the fact that the prince even has this item is never directly addressed. It'd be totally possible a player wouldn't even know they have this item they need for this part. I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but it does seem a bit cluttered, and could have been much clearer with something as simple as his master giving him the ruby before he left Dalam or something. Or the guard even just simply saying he wants some jewelry from Dalam. And to be fair, the game does try to let the player know, so it's not like it's unsolvable or anything, not even close. Just a little confusing. The fact the prince has to give away what can only be assumed is a personal treasure, seeing as it was in his personal inventory prior, is a bit sad. Another show of his persistent humbling to serve the greater good. But again, it could have been something a bit more though. Inside the exhibit are two shattered men. Yeah, Night at the Museum before Night at the Museum. Or even just Night. Talk about lifelike exhibits, which I think is supposed to be the joke. The guard says Pokey was here and took pictures of the hieroglyphs, directing the player to check them, as clearly they're important somehow. And if the player arrives in the situation of going to the pyramid first, the connection is all the clearer. The hieroglyphs recount that the pyramids were built as a fortress against invaders, and that said invaders are reborn every millennium to launch another attack. These invaders are the extraterrestrials and other creatures. It describes a place out of time that's beyond many other places, the Dark and the Lost Underworld. Note the D in Dark is capitalized, clarifying it's a name of a place and not just the archetypal dark. Only one with the Hawkeye can pierce the dark, and the Sphinx oversees it. It concludes with a number pattern and to dance in front of it. The prince urges them to go to Scaraba to investigate. On the way out, the guard gives the player a copy to consult it again if needed. Take that, desk lady. So, a lot was dumped just then that at this moment largely won't make sense to the player, and I'm not going to overanalyze it because it's meant to be that way. The game is slowly unfurling things, so let's just head back to Scaraba. On the way out though, the phone is ringing. It's a call for Mr. Fork, presumably the man who earlier was talking about Mr. Spoon. The caller, in fact, is Mr. Spoon from Fourside, saying he has something amazing. As said before, the game opens up a lot at this point, and this is where it really starts, so let's scope it out. One nice thing about if a player has to return to Summers is they can now use Teleport Beta, which is much easier to execute, and both Summers and Scaraba have plenty of room to do so. But first, let's go back to Fourside. At the Dinosaur Museum, Mr. Spoon says in order for him to show just what's so amazing, it'll cost an autograph from Venus. He says it can be on anything, which I think is a good distinction to make, as otherwise a player might think they need to seek something out for it when that isn't the case. The broadness of anything instead of some specific thing simplifies it. He even says something specific at first and then retcons it, unless they took the toilet paper thing too seriously. The player now sees Venus as the sole headliner now that the Runaway Five have split. During her performance, a fan approaches the stage, then even approaches her on stage, before being swept away by security. Seeing as Venus is blonde and is presented to be very alluring, this could be a reference to a famous instance of this happening during a Madonna concert in the mid-80s, though a crazed fan climbing on stage certainly isn't unheard of. After watching her performance, the quartet can see her in the green room. Without trouble, she signs a banana peel and plants a kiss on the main protagonist. Many interpret this as her literally smacking him, but not only does that make no sense contextually, it's clearly meant to be an onomatopoeia for a big kiss. She's so kind about the whole thing, I don't see why she'd hit him. She's giving him a little kiss because she's flattered. This is a very money-focused section of the game. Paying to go into the Summers Museum, then the Fourside Museum, then Venus's show, then back to the Fourside Museum. It's very unlikely this would be an issue for the player at this point, as they're likely drowning in cash, but it's nice to see it get some actual utility since they likely have so much of it. Gives it a story use as well. Anyway, giving the signed banana to Mr. Spoon, he now allows the party through, finally into the next room, which the player has seen be walled off from them since their initial visit to Fourside, at this point a while ago. He says there's a huge rat, clearly warning of a boss fight, or at least some enemy. This also works due to Fourside being a parody of New York City, a place known for its giant rats and pervasive rat problem. All connects. In the next room is simply an entrance to the sewer. While it's best to keep it simple, yeah, this looks a bit awkward. Could have passed it off as like a drain or something even, and added some boxes to make it look more like a real room in a building. but it does its job, leading the player into a mini-dungeon. 4-side sewers. Appropriately, rats, bugs, and garbage are the main enemies down here. Setting compliant, not much else to say. The stinky ghost does somewhat resemble poo though, unsure of its intentionality. All the items here are also appropriately in garbage cans, just doing its best to emphasize how gross this place is. There's a ladder down into the sewage where, although the player knows is probably the right way, probably also hopes it isn't. The game even toys with them, having alternate paths, making them think just maybe there's another way. But nope, eventually they'll need to get knee-deep in it. And it slows the party down too, making you feel like they're really trudging through it. It's disgusting. Though the restraint in coloring it gray, as opposed to something like yellow or brown, is appreciated. It just would have been a step too far. And sometimes the action of not doing something someone could is the best decision that can be made. Instead, it's more defined by trash, which goes with the chests and enemies. The path is straightforward, just one long hallway essentially, which makes sense since the more puzzling elements came just before the dungeon, with all the running around with Mr. Spoon, so keeping things simpler was the right choice. The music is also energetic and determined after all that stuff before. It serves solely to pump the player up for whatever this huge rat is. At the end of the road is a sanctuary guardian. The boss is the Plague Rat of Doom, with an oddly human face, lacking a real rat's defining nose. His fighting style is defined by his hard-hitting physical attacks, mirroring those of the smaller rat enemies, and his ability to poison, which makes sense, as he's a literal plague rat, which spread the bubonic plague, poisoning people and killing a huge portion of Europe in the 14th century. It can be a tough fight, but after, the player comes out on the other side, showing this was the way to the Magnet Hill they saw so long ago. For eagle-eyed players, the entrance to the sewer may have even reminded them of seeing the exit to the sanctuary before. The protagonist sees a baby's bottle and receives the 4th melody. In this little diamond area is also a chest, which will be especially eye-grabbing due to its contrast with the green grass, and that this is the only one with a treasure of any sort. It contains the carrot key, a special type of Bunny's favorite carrot. This is how the player could have this item prior to going to Scaraba, triggering special dialogue where the captain points it out, as well as revisiting Dalam, signaling it's connected to the rabbit statues there. And further, there's even a dialogue change for if the player has completed both sanctuaries prior to the trip to Scaraba. The gang then heads back into the city. Fuzzy Pickles. But seeing as with the key and what the sailor says about Dalam, we might as well head there next. The Sphinx has been in charge of the Hawkeye for a millennium. He can watch it for a few more minutes, right? Teleporting to Dalam, the player now has access to a ton of amazing healing items. They're getting towards the late game now. Returning to the palace, one of the prince's advisors mentions incidents recently disturbing the peace, letting the player know there is something for them to do here, not only because of what's said, but that it's said at all, as this is new dialogue from this NPC upon traveling back here. His master offers free healing, which is both considerate of the game designers and totally in line with this character and his values. Most of the NPCs have new things to say that follow up on what they said before, so nice continuity with such minor characters. Others also mention the monsters, which is nice in case the player didn't go back to the palace, covers all bases. The main character also can't do mood training. Obviously this is story-based, but I also see it as a lack of maturity in his psychic powers. Anyway, back to the rabbits. Using the key, they all disappear. This whole thing with them seems to be a slight allusion to Alice in Wonderland, but possibly also enshrined rabbits. Japan's national religion is Shinto. In Shinto, some deities show themselves as rabbits, and rabbits also often are seen as statues to welcome visitors to shrines. So I think though there is associated symbolism with the rabbits, it's more about world building, as they're portrayed as guards to what seems to be an ancient temple. And seeing as Dalam is based on many Asian countries, this connection doesn't seem all that unlikely, especially since many Buddhist temples in ancient times were built in caves. Perhaps the carrot key can even be seen as an offering to them. Now to head in. Inside, the enemies are strange creatures, and even what appear to be maybe people? Their overworld sprites, however, are glowing orbs, seemingly reinforcing the spirituality of the location, that they're spirits of the former temple, such as the Tengu, a clear play on Tengu from Japanese mythology, which are affiliated with mountains, martial arts, and spiritual knowledge. In the southernmost part is the Bracer of Kings. This is a piece of armor only for the prince, one of a kind and cannot be thrown away. This sets the precedent that he has specialized armor, and it will likely be given to the player. More on this another time. Continuing on, this is one of the more complex dungeons in the game, with a lot of branching sections, contrasting four-side sewers greatly. It really is just guessing though, and can be annoying being sent all the way to the beginning of the dungeon, but it's not very long so it's not too bad. It's padding nonetheless though, and feels a bit uninspired. I suppose there is a connection between rabbits and holes however, so maybe that Alice in Wonderland illusion runs a bit deeper than I initially thought. No pun intended. The finish line is the boss, the 6th Sanctuary Guardian. This is Thunder and Storm, who also use the same theme as the Kraken, which is interesting, making them one of the only 2 exceptions to the designated theme. It does work for them too though, clearly having electronic elements to it, which certainly goes with Thunder and Storm. Though the duo is clearly spun from the many electricity-based enemies in the dungeon, what they exactly are isn't clear. Storm, the white one, is holding a palm leaf, which in Japanese mythology is how many creatures conjure, you guessed it, so that checks out. Seeing as this is in Asia, they're most likely a reference to an old Chinese poem by Du Mu, ironic name there. In a preface to a collection of poems by Li He, he coined the term ox demons and snake spirits in regards to being surrounded by evil spirits. Well, seeing this appears to be an ancient temple, there are spirits, there are ox horns, and there are snake bodies. Again, all rooted in the Asian culture that Dalam references. And come on, referencing someone with that name cannot be a coincidence. It further is likely as the term became frequently used during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in China in the late 1960s and early 70s, still relatively fresh in the culture, not to mention other allusions to proletariats were made earlier in the story. The fight takes advantage of more common RPG tropes, having them take a turn charging, then doing a big attack. They're immensely weak to freeze moves as one might expect, luckily which the player has access to 2 users of now. When the storm subsides, the party reaches the pink cloud. The protagonist sees a vision of his mother when she was young, and collects the 6th melody. The cloud itself resembles those of many traditional pieces of Buddhist artwork. It's all very relaxing, making one almost forget what they were doing. Oh yeah, the pyramid! Back at the pyramids, if a player did remember the museum before leaving, the Sphinx would be a clear sign to them from the exhibit, and an even clearer one to those who did not. The Hint Man is also nearby, good place for him since many players will probably hug the edge to avoid some enemies. This salesman is also hilarious, selling deluxe water for $200 per bottle in the middle of a desert. Great visual joke. One more thing before the Sphinx, the player can also find the master criminal worm enemy in this desert. It can be easily beaten and gives tons of experience points, just like its relative in Dusty Dunes. This is a great place for it, as it's like a treasure in itself for finding, since it may take a couple of minutes. And if a player came here without having leveled up the prince, this is a very quick and easy way to get him caught up without much hassle, so long as they're willing to wait until it shows up. Okay, so back to the task at hand. In front of the Sphinx, it'll ask for the code. Here, the player needs to step on the panels in the order shown in the hieroglyph, which they'll have a copy of so they don't need to go back to the Summers Museum if they need another look. The spacing of the text for this part is way different than anything else in the game, so I think it's definitely clear enough. The sounds also clue the player in when they're getting close, so since there are also only 5 buttons to press, they could also just guess and check. I really like though that in order to enter the pyramid, there's an actual puzzle to do, while others more so have obstacles. It gives the moment a bit more, immersing the player by letting them solve an archaeological mystery within the universe. Again, it harkens back to something like Indiana Jones or a number of other adventure serials. Once the player solves it, the Sphinx also reiterates that they're searching for the Hawkeye, which is a good time to do so, since the player could have gone any number of places between the museum and back here, as we've seen. Inside the pyramid are numerous enemies, like mummies and even hieroglyphs. Gives more of a disturbed grave element to it, which makes sense since the party is literally aiming to grave rob it. The way the hieroglyph enemies are introduced is also cool, since the first couple times they walk past the ordinary ones, they don't move, but the enemies look identical to them, so it does feel like a surprise when they come out to play. The Guardian hieroglyphs themselves seem to be based on Anubis, the god of funerary rites, protector of graves, and the guide to the underworld in ancient Egyptian religion. It can also drop a Pharaoh's Curse, which can inflict poison on an enemy. The Pharaoh's Curse, also called the Curse of the Pharaohs or Curse of King Tut, is a superstition that says those who disturb a pharaoh's grave will be cursed with an illness, and even death. Makes sense to be dropped by an enemy attempting to protect the sacred grounds. There's also the lethal asp. Asp being an antiquated term for a snake, and is usually used now to refer to the Egyptian cobra. Spiders are also here, enough said. The last enemy is the petrified royal guard, which appears to be a living statue, presumably created to also protect the resting king. They resemble the Ashoptis, created to serve the deceased, specifically manual labor. Makes sense with a build like that. The pyramid itself is a long gauntlet of enemies, all in a straight line, unless you want to be picky about the stairs. The chests here are coffins, which is comedic and goes with the grave robbing subtext. The player will eventually reach a room that has some branching routes. The dungeon is laid out so that the way to progress is to the right, in a straight line, and additional treasure is off the beaten path. Keeps things focused and clearer to the player. In the center of the room, there's a large coffin, which the game says is suspicious. Simple way to convey it will be important later. Taking the top left path first, there's a long hallway that terminates in a room with a bag of dragonite in it. A real treasure, as this is one of the only few in the entire game. Feels right to find something so valuable and mythical in a pyramid. This casket has a cup of life noodles in it, which is a funny joke and cleverly delivered through the gaming medium, as a treasure would inherently attract a player, unknowingly setting them up for the punchline. Back on the main route, at the end of a long path is a mini-boss, the Guardian General, who appropriately uses the Sanctuary Guardian theme, as he's a literal spiritual guard, as well as a more traditional understanding of one, as the next room over has a secret to getting closer to the true treasure of the pyramid, as well as a literal treasure in a rain pendant that can be found just past him. These valuable items found throughout, even the bag of dragonite, also work in the world to be here, as ancient Egyptians would bury their kings with wondrous treasures, as it was believed they could be taken along to their afterlife. This button will stick out to the player to press, as it's clearly outlined to draw the eye, and pressing it will say something changed. And since there is no way for the player to go now but back the way they came, this will naturally lead them back to the large sarcophagus from earlier, which is now moved, revealing a hole to go down. Again, the elaborate elements and ingenuity of the place really evokes the sense of an old adventure film, and works doubly since the pyramids really were designed in ways to throw off intruders, through secrecy of the true chambers, spiritual protections, and overall complex designs. Down the pit, the player arrives at the true treasure, the Hawkeye. The item appears to be a tear-shaped stone with an eye engraved on it. In Egyptian mythology, eyes are often associated with divine authority and protection. The two major ones are the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra. I'm more inclined to see it as an allusion to the Eye of Ra, as Ra was the Egyptian god of the sun, and seen as the Hawkeye is closely linked to its sight and piercing darkness, that would make sense. Both Ra and Horus were often depicted as falcons, and even oftentimes merged together as one god called Ra Horakti. And honestly, there is something that inclines me to believe that this might just be based on both of the gods, seeing as the item is literally called the Hawkeye, and both of them were depicted as falcons or hawks. So it's very possible it actually is more so based on their combined form, their fusion. That, and it's also clearly a play on the saying of something or someone having the eyes of a hawk. Pressing on, the player is forced through an onslaught of enemies, who may not be the toughest, but are likely draining their resources. This makes the placement of the water salesman all the more well done, as it gives the prince access to much more magic, so long as the player made the room for them. And it overall just gives a nice little section here for the prince to really shine on the team, especially since a lot of his most powerful abilities are yet to be unlocked. On that note, at this time I think we should discuss the prince's utility in battle. While the female protagonist can pray and the inventor can spy, the prince can mirror. This ability allows the prince to transform into one of the enemies being fought in a battle, and use their moves at the cost of actually controlling him. It has a 50% success rate and doesn't work on bosses. It proves helpful in some circumstances, allowing the player to perhaps heal the party for free or use the powerful physical attack of an enemy, so it's an interesting feature that can add some depth to battles, as again, the player will lose control of him for the remainder of the fight. However, in practice, it's pretty rarely useful, though it certainly can be helpful in avoiding using up his magic or making up for his lower physical attack stat, which at this point doesn't pack much of a punch. As a party member, the prince is a mixed attacker who also has many useful PSI attacks, almost a hybrid of the main character and the female protagonist, though with more magical versatility, having buffs and other assisting PSI too. Further ahead, the player will find a diamond band, which also works for the reasons mentioned before as it plays into the schematic of finding treasure, specifically jewels in ancient ruins.
They're jewels.
It's also the dungeon's magic butterfly location to help the player through this final stretch. Down the next hole, the assault continues with more enemies, but after banishing the remaining disturbed spirits in their path, the Chosen Four finally reach the exit.